branch. So, I mean, obviously we're here this evening to talk about the trade union bill, workers' rights, and also we'll hear from campaigns that are ongoing at the minute from workers and trade unions to fight back against injustice and for decent pay, for respect in the workplace, and many other issues. And obviously in the last week, people in the north will have seen and heard how can you get away from it? News that Paul Given, the First Minister, resigned, and there's been much discussion about legislation and what should make its way through Stormont in the last weeks, months of this mandate. And I think within that conversation, within that debate, there's been little focus at all on workers' rights, on laws being implemented that could make it easier for workers to get organised, to take action and to improve their lot. And this is what the Trade Union Freedom Bill, in short, is here to do. So we're here tonight to say that the parties in Stormont, they should ensure that this bill is passed, is heard, and makes it through Stormont in the remainder time that it will be in place. Party leaders apparently have been meeting the last week or so, the last few days. I've had no invite, so my message today to them all, tonight to them all, and hopefully you can echo it whatever way possible, is they need to ensure that this bill makes it through Stormont, that it's heard in Stormont. I mean, how many times have we heard during COVID honeyed words about frontline workers, about thanks to frontline workers, how we wouldn't be where we were for the efforts of frontline workers. Indeed, that's all true, but it seems to be that we're returning to the way things were just exactly before COVID. This bill really gives Stormont the opportunity to make sure there is a significant change for workers' rights, hopefully towards the end of COVID. It would remove the shackles that Thatcher implemented on workers and trade unions in the 80s in Britain, and obviously in the early 90s through these laws beyond the Statute of Stormont since then. Employment law, as not everybody knows, is devolved to Stormont. So they can't blame the Tories this time. This is on the parties in Stormont who've refused to change the laws for decades from 1998 onwards. So this bill is their chance to ensure that the changes are implemented. I mean, the Governor of the Bank of England, I'm sure people saw recently, is agreeing with parties in Stormont to say inflation's gone up. Don't be bullshit. Don't be asking for pay raises. And we reject that. And obviously this bill needs to be passed to ensure that workers can have proper pay raises that are way above inflation. So we'll just quickly go through what the bill will do, and obviously if there's questions in time at the end, I'll answer any detailed questions. But there's broadly 6 main tenets of the bill which we think are very, very important. And obviously, as we're saying, that workers have been repeatedly under attack from Stormont executives through redundancies in the civil service, forced redundancies through the welfare attacks, which affected everybody on benefits, but primarily workers as well. But what the bill will actually do, it will make it easier for people in smaller workplaces to join a trade union and to get a recognition agreement. Currently, you have to have over 21 workers in your workplace if you're to get a recognition agreement in place. The bill will reduce this down to 5, meaning all those small workplaces, hospitality venues, everything that has less than 21 workers will be able to get a recognition agreement, will be able to negotiate with their employer and improve their conditions. That affects hundreds of thousands of workers right across the north. So significant improvement and advancement for workers' rights it would be. The second is to remove the ban on solidarity action. I'm sure as people will know, in the 80s, Thatcher's real way to attack the unions, and the miners' unions in particular, was to make solidarity action to people striking in support of another group of workers, make that illegal. So we want to remove that. It's a reactionary policy from the bygone era of Thatcherism, and it should be binned. And this is what this bill will aim to do. And we want to shorten the balloting time for workers to take action, to make it easier and quicker for them to strike. We want to extend the voting options, so making it easier for workers to vote. They can vote online, vote in the workplace, as well as obviously the traditional method of postal ballot. It would enhance protection for workers who are being dismissed for taking strike action, and that would make it harder for employers to come after workers and trade unions who have engaged in a strike action. And then obviously would allow unions to negotiate on a range of greater issues in the workplace, extend what can be currently negotiated on. So I think that this would be significant, very significant for workers. Not just saying that because it's a bill standing in my name, but if that was implemented, that would advance workers' rights massively or as society. And I think it's clear if those in power get their way, like I said earlier, there will be a return to normalcy as existed pre and during COVID. There will be a return to sectarianism. We're already hearing the drums being beaten and people being whipped up. Below inflation pay cuts are back on the cards again, even for our health workers who were clapped and applauded and thanked by those in power. And obviously already hundreds of thousands of workers and people who are not working are unable to afford to heat their homes with the astronomical, disgraceful increase in oil and gas. So we'll need to see across society a trade union movement that is combative. It's taken on employers, it's taken on the government, and there's obviously people here tonight who have already done that in tremendous ways. That argues against division, it pushes for those who made the fortunes during COVID, for those people to pay to fund our public services and they improve people's conditions. And obviously currently unions are restricted from taking as much action as they could and would like to by this current anti-worker trade union laws. So as well as the laws developing benefits to workers and improve their lives in all these different ways, I hope, I think you would hope that this would kickstart a renewed conversation across society about the benefits of being in a trade union, the benefits of being in a collective agreement in your workplace, and the strength of the trade union movement right across society, because history shows that the advancements that it's brought in Ireland, in Britain, America, and right across the world. So that's me being quiet for now. Going to introduce our first speaker, who we're very pleased to have join us this evening, Susan Fitzgerald, a regional coordinator with Unite the Union. Over to Susan. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Gerry. How you doing, everyone? So just to start off, just appreciate the invite on behalf of Unite, and to start by stating the obvious that Unite welcomed this bill, and well done to everyone who worked very hard to get it to this stage. I don't think it's controversial in a meeting like this to say that the bulk of the legislation governing ballots, action, etc., is designed to make industrial action less effective and make balloting for action onerous and expensive. This bill, as Gerry has just outlined, supports measures to reduce notice time, timescales and difficulty when moving to ballot and take action. And that's obviously completely necessary. I have to make an apology here that I'm not going to make a big speech here. I'm going to touch on a couple of points of the bill and how I think they're relevant. And the reason I haven't had time to prepare a better speech is that I've spent all day long, and one of my Unite colleagues is on the call, Doogie. We spent all day long preparing the paperwork for a strike ballot at Spirit Aerospace, or Shorts, as people would maybe know it, and we just served notice on them this afternoon. It's quite significant. It's one of the largest manufacturing workplaces in Northern Ireland, very strongly trade union organised workplace. And this ballot for strike action has been a long time coming. Last year, we've seen attacks on the pension scheme. Now, in the context of a cost of living crisis, or as McGarry TD called it the other day, referencing a worker in Cork, a cost of surviving crisis. Workers in short are continuously told that they're well paid, but the reality is, like all other workers, they're struggling to pay their bills at this time, surviving as they are in a time when inflation has hit a 30-year peak. We haven't seen cost of living pressures like this since March 1992. and pay offers that might have been accepted in the past, might have even been accepted a year ago, a year and a half ago, just won't cut it now. There's an acute awareness. There's a sign there about no sound. Can everyone else hear me? Yeah, okay. There's an acute awareness amongst workers in general that unless you fight for better and more at work, you won't get it anywhere else. You know, the working class tend not to be independently wealthy. You might get left something in a will, but it's not the norm. You might win a few quid in the lotto, but it's not the norm. So the only place you have to address the money that comes in for you and your family is what you fight for in the workplace. And Unite has declared its intention to fight and win battles with and alongside our members. We have a historic strike fund of £36 million and we're ready to spend it. And that's timely intent to declare, because I don't, you know, it's certainly my view that we will see sharper, more pronounced battles in the context of the pressure that working class people are facing just to heat their homes, feed their kids, run their cars, etc. But also another factor there is that another context is a labour shortage. 83% of bosses in Northern Ireland who were surveyed said they were suffering as a result of what they call the skills shortage, and there is a skills shortage, but I think they also mean a labour shortage as well. And I think what that does for us is it gives us as workers more confidence about picking a fight, maybe a bit more labour mobility. Globally, we've seen the phenomena of the Great Resignation as a response to what's going on in society. I'd be interested in people if people think that that's a factor here, but certainly there is more confidence about fighting back. So you have a necessity and you have a bit more confidence. And I think a fundamental point in that context that's raised in the bill is the idea of solidarity. Cornerstone of our movement, cornerstone of the labour and trade union movement, so for socialist, trade unionists, etc. Solidarity is the watchword that you live by. And I think solidarity, sympathetic strikes are key. But just make a quick point on that it's a discussion that we need to have, we don't just need solidarity on industrial issues. Trade unions have a responsibility, in my view, to give a lead on social issues too. Like, for instance, International Women's Day is coming up on the 8th of March. Imagine a situation where there was a strike of women and men against femicide, against gender violence, against harassment. That's not alien to workers, shouldn't be alien to workers. Unite organised in the hospitality sector here and elsewhere. And we had a survey last year which found that 89% of hospitality workers said that they'd experienced one or more incidents of sexual harassment in their working life. So it is harassment, is gender violence just a social issue, or is it also a workplace issue? They absolutely cross over. So we want to see solidarity, and in my view, my personal view, is that the proactive action of striking is not just contained, or shouldn't just be contained to the workplace, but obviously we're fighting to make it more impactful in the workplace. I'll just maybe take the opportunity at this point of referencing a dispute that's going on at the moment, an occupation or a work-in Belfast with hostel workers at the Regina Cayley hostel in Belfast, where the women workers there who are faced with redundancy and a whole host of other stuff like that are now documented in the form of grievances, really atrocious and poor behaviour by their direct employers, have not just for themselves, despite facing suspension, harassments, and then legal letters today, have taken a really phenomenally heroic stand in defence of services for homeless women. They've done more than anyone else has done on the issue. Now they're winning huge support in that, but the outpouring of solidarity around that has been quite incredible. There's registered childminders on from Unite tonight who instinctively just turned up. Workers from Teo, workers from My Park turned up with big boxes of food. And I shouldn't go on because I'll miss people out, because the support given to those workers, the instinctive gesture and action of solidarity shows that's there alive and kicking. And it is very, very important. The trade union movement was built on the basis of solidarity, sympathetic strikes. The idea of common cause, an injury to one is the concern of all. And it's one of the very first things that Thatcher and her cohorts, as Gerry said, went after and tried to legislate against. And why did they do that? It's because it's effective. And I think those ideas, they never went away, but they can come back in a much, much more forceful way, precisely because they're effective. And it's one of the key points to be welcomed in the bill. At the same time as welcome and really applauding the drafters of the bill and Gerry, Fiona and co. At the same time, it's worth in a meeting like this, and I know Gerry agrees with this, that while the bill is fully to be welcomed, and we'll roll up our sleeves to support it, getting through whatever stages, because obviously there'll be opposition. We know that we don't wait for rights. We don't just legislate for our rights, we take them. I mean, in the context of a discussion like this tonight, we absolutely have to begin a discussion about, well, do we challenge unjust laws? Does there need to be a broader discussion in the trade union movement about breaking the law if those laws favour bosses, if those laws tie the hands of working class people to look after their family, to bring in an income that they can live on? Malcolm X said that we're not outnumbered, we're out-organised. And that's very much the feeling today, but that is changing. There's more workers, there's more of us than there is of the bosses. The ILO, the International Labour Organization, said in 2020, there's 3.3 billion workers on the globe. That's not even including people who are working class but not in work. But we're not as organised as we need to be. But that is changing. We've seen it changing during COVID. The fact that registered childminders, as I mentioned them there, people who work in the home, got organised in a trade union in the context of COVID, set up a branch, are challenging politicians, are challenging left, right and centre. It shows the instinct to come together and organise will surpass any laws and legislation once we're fully organised. But the measures outlined in the bill just make that easier, give us an impetus, and it should be fully supported by everyone. The last point I'll make, Gerry, is the reference to organising in the bill, as you finished on, is extremely important. Organising in the context of recognition, and I agree, the example is a brilliant example of smaller workplaces, also precarious workplaces, hospitality workers, where they very seldom meet this strict and narrow requirement that there must be 21 people working there, because you might have a big franchise like Starbucks or Costco or one of these. I'm not sure how they work. Some of them are not franchises, but often those chains, they're owned by individuals. And so you might get 5 coffee shops workers coming together, but they're all regarded as single entities. And if you look at the development of Starbucks workers in the US, who are challenging this idea of the unorganised, who are coming together and fighting for union contracts, we can see that here. There's a huge desire for that here. Certainly we hear it every day in Unite. So the idea of taking an impediment out of the road, like the statutory route to recognition, is a very important, it's a very detailed and really good nuanced point that the drafters put in the bill, and it shows an understanding of the situation facing workers. Just, I'll finish, guys, because I know we have a lot of other speakers, and I'm looking to stay on, I'm hoping to stay on as long as possible to hear them. I look forward to the contradictions in our society of capitalism are just getting so much sharper. That's inevitable that we'll see battles ahead. The 10 richest billionaires doubled their wealth during COVID. And at the same time, you have the appalling spectacle of the neck of him, the governor of the Bank of England, lecturing workers about not putting in ambitious pay claims. This fella is on 575 grand a year to sit and lecture working class people. It's absolutely outrageous. And the trade union movement needs to do everything in its power to mobilise workers in pursuit of better pay. And in doing that, people won't just go back into their boxes. If you challenge and fight, and you're doing it with so many other people, you're going to look at the nature of this system, that it does not serve workers. It doesn't even afford basic respect at work or at home. All those issues come into sharp focus when people move into struggle. This bill aids that struggle, and it's very much welcome. So well done, guys. Sorry if we went over time there.
Brilliant, Susan. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us, and solidarity from the meeting to all those workers and disputes that you you mentioned. Next speaker is Gareth Muir from Aegis, trade union that organises workers in the financial sector. Gareth, thanks for joining us, and over to yourself.
Thank you, Gerry. So yeah, as Gerry said, my name is Gareth. I'm the National Secretary for Aegis, the union. Very grateful for the opportunity, Gerry, to speak here tonight, and just to thank you as well for bringing this bill forward. And it's fair to say, as Susan touched on, this bill has been a long time coming. As Gerry says, it's a devolved matter here, so there's no excuse for such action to have taken so long. So hopefully it does pass, and it's followed by similar such proposals. I'll start tonight just highlighting why Aegis have decided to support this bill. So we have members scattered across the UK working mainly in financial services companies. And it doesn't go unnoticed to us that some of the poorest pay and conditions of any set of employees are those based within the Northwest. Now, it's my personal belief, and those a large section of workers from my local town, Derry, that too many employers come here not to provide economic benefit, but to exploit the economic situation. Now, exploitative practices from some companies across these islands, mainly larger employers, allows them to undercut local businesses who actually pay their taxes and treat workers with dignity. We even see locally draconian practices within call centres, where every minute of your day is tracked and monitored and scrutinised, where even a minor fraction could cause issue with your employer. Now, we see dedicated, hard-working people work exhaustive hours under intense pressure in return for low wage to maintain their financial hardship. So let's be clear. I myself, I've worked in call centres for most of my working life, some good, some bad. But I've seen the sea change that trade union representation can make to an employer. In any call centre, the most important person, and often the only people who actually make the business money, are the guys on the phones. They're the product of the call centre. Now, if they stop, the business stops. They decide if there's profit at the end of the month. I think we need to empower workers to understand the power that gives them, to stand up for themselves, their colleagues, and their community, and demand a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. It's not very radical. But the more money we put in pockets of local workers, the more money is available for small local businesses. And we all would surely support buying local. But when you're squeezed so tight, running paycheck to paycheck, your options become very limited. So when large corporations are getting away with paying poverty wages, it not only harms those workers, it harms our local cities and towns. It hurts families stressed day and daily trying to manage the budget. Now, at Aegis, we're currently working on a campaign to try unionise call centre workers. We are starting off focusing mainly within Derry. We've received support from the TUC, the Derry Trades Council, and the Northern Ireland Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. So I want to just put a call out to call centre workers. So if you are a call centre worker, particularly within Derry, we want to say we want to hear from you. And we want to help you organise within the workplace. And it doesn't matter if you're not a union member, if you're not even sure what a union is. If you want to say in how you're treated and how you're paid, then we would ask you to contact us. If you're not sure about unions, or you feel an employer doesn't allow unions, understand that by law, they can't stop you joining a union. So contact us and let's have a chat. Because if you want to bring about change, you need a seat at the table. And ultimately, that's what unions do. They give you a seat at the table. So you can stay anonymous if you don't feel comfortable. But again, I would plead with all call centre workers, particularly within Derry, to reach out and have a chat with us. Because ultimately, that's where change starts. Now, comrades, as many as you know, generations before us fought so we could have a decent standard of living. But these gains are being eroded. Where once you could afford to buy a home on a modest income, it's merely a dream for too many. It was the trade union movement that won the weekend. But let's be honest, many could ask, what weekend? Many workers don't even get a break at Christmas, as they need to get back into work Christmas night for a busy day of capitalism. But that's the state of play right now. And some feel, as touched on already, such as the Governor of Bank of England, that it's radical to say if you work a full-time job, you shouldn't have to worry about how you're going to heat the house, keep the electric on, or God forbid, enjoy a luxury. And these aren't radical requests, they're very reasonable demands. Radical is a handful of people hoarding half the world's wealth, while millions struggle just to survive. That's radical. So comrades, working class people across these islands have been pushed and pulled for far too long. Every crisis by the rich elite donor classes has required the working poor to pay for it. Every crisis is a reason to further erode the living standards, public services, and the overall quality of life. So comrades, I call on every person to support this bill, whether you're in a trade union or not, whether you're a worker or not. We need to do more to empower each other. So we need to get off our knees and stand together. I'll finish there. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, Gareth. Thanks very much, and thanks for joining us this evening. Folks, our next speaker is Jaffe. She's a US Labour historian, author of many books. The latest is Why Work Won't Love You Back. Sorry, I'll mute myself. I'm hoping you could hear that. Why Work Won't Love You Back, indeed. Sarah, can you...
Yeah,
go ahead.
hello.
Yes.
Hi, Susan was just talking about solidarity. So solidarity from the US, although technically I'm in London, so I guess also solidarity from London. Thank you all for having me. It is good to virtually be back in Ireland, where I just was, and it's always good to be involved in these things. So I cannot speak to the specifics of this bill and the status of workers' rights under devolution, but I can talk about what it's like to exist and work and organize under a patchwork of laws that are designed to keep us separated and confused and to keep workers from knowing what their rights are and what kind of access they have to organizing to support to that kind of solidarity action. So I'm thinking about this because, of course, it's Thatcher's anti-union laws, and in the US, we're dealing with, well, many different people's anti-union laws. But since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been thinking of the particular kind of isolation we've been under as life in Margaret Thatcher units, right? In, her famous line that there is no such thing as society, there are individual men and women and there are families. And we've kind of been forced into that lifestyle for the last couple of years. And if there's anything I think we've learned from it, it's that it's terrible, right? To be this isolated and cut off from each other. And yet that is what these kinds of union restrictions are designed to do, right? They're designed to keep us feeling isolated and cut off from each other and like we have no support and like nobody will show up when we need them. And thinking about union legislation and union power, and as Susan said again, the need to have a strong trade union movement that helps support good laws being passed that then makes the union movement even stronger. These things don't sort of happen in a vacuum. You don't, no offense to Gerry, just pass good laws and then strong unions come into existence, right? Strong unions breed stronger unions that then push politicians to pay attention and put forward legislation that actually creates some space for them. So in the States, as I said, we sort of exist under this patchwork of laws. There is federal labor law that has been slowly undermined essentially since the Maine Act was passed in 1935. And then there are statewide laws and even local laws that are, again, there are very specific bans on certain things. There are so-called right to work laws that are designed to defund unions, but a lot of people think they ban unions. And this very specific way that, again, that, you think like, oh, well, we can't do anything about this because this is the law of the United Kingdom. It's designed, again, to disempower. It's designed to keep us feeling like we're stuck in those little Margaret Thatcher units. So it's also important, I think, and we're seeing this around a bill called the PRO Act in the US, which is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which would undo a lot of the things that have been done, again, to chip away at the right to things like solidarity action, the right to strike in all these different ways, right? But also representation, all of this stuff, slowing down the representation process. What we do in the States goes through something called the National Labor Relations Board, which I will not bore you with details on. Suffice it to say, it doesn't really work anymore. And so when we think about putting forward legislation like this, and a lot of people will kind of go like, oh, well, maybe it won't pass, but it can itself be a draw to organizing and a way to think about, okay, well, this is what the law says right now. We can organize to change it, but we can also organize whether or not the law changes. And we can also challenge the law in all these different ways. You can challenge it in Stormont, you can challenge it in the streets. And the bans on solidarity action obviously aren't stopping people from showing up on the picket line. So, you know, I just want to sort of end with a specific example because it's one that I think a lot of people have probably heard of, which is the Chicago Teachers Union. And right as a reform caucus took power in the Chicago Teachers Union in 2010, 2011, the state legislature passed a law raising the threshold for a strike ballot. And that was designed specifically to make sure they could never strike again. But what it actually did in this weird way, again, was provide this target for good organizing and say, all right, yeah, you think you've got us, but we actually can overcome this. And so this is the challenge that we're seeing now. And since folks mentioned the Starbucks workers organizing in the US, again, this is a campaign that's happening across states that have wildly different labor laws. And yet it's spreading virally, if I can even use that word anymore, which I probably shouldn't, across the country, that people are picking it up in Memphis, Tennessee, and in New York at the same time, right? That it started in Buffalo and it's gone all over the country. This is the thing that can happen when we start a good conversation about what people's rights are, and you have strong campaigns and a fight that says, you know, we need to change the law at the federal level, at the local level, to make sure that people can do this. Because we are seeing right now, I think, everywhere that the desire to organize is there, that the inspiration to organize is there, that people are ready to fight, that, you know, when we talk about the Great Resignation or anything else, people are mad after the last few years. And the thing you can't do is tell people over and over again how essential they are and then treat them like garbage without them saying like, hey, wait a minute here. Our working conditions just got worse and you were clapping for us and telling us how great and how wonderful and how important we are, but we're not important enough for a raise. We're not important enough to have the right to go on strike. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity right now to be talking about these things. It's a wonderful opening to say, we can actually change these laws that were imposed on us by this person. And we can use that as an opportunity again to open up doors for organizing that maybe didn't exist a few months ago. And I will end there.
Brilliant, Sarah. Thanks very much for that. And solidarity to all the workers in America and everybody oppressed fighting back. Our next speaker shouldn't need an introduction. Give him a brief one. Eamonn McCann, long-time socialist and trade unionist, and the person who initially brought the Trade Union Freedom Bill in its first stage to Stormont in 2016. That seemed like a lifetime ago, but Eamonn, obviously a long time fighting against these regressive and reactionary laws. Eamonn, thanks for joining us. Over to yourself.
Okay, the speeches so far have been terrific. Thank you very much, Sarah, and Susan and Gareth, and everybody. I mean, that's just terrific. You know, I just tell a couple of stories, if I may, which sort of illustrate sort of the points that I'm trying to make. And the first one is just about a few years ago, and some people will remember this. There was an unofficial postal strike, or postal sorters strike in Belfast, which began sort of in the Shankill Road sorting office when a manager seized a diary from the locker of one of the workers and saw numbers and accused the worker of taking down notes for a paramilitary organization. There's no evidence of this whatsoever, none. And they came along and sacked him. And says immediately that you're bringing paramilitary stuff sort of into the workforce, which is as important to stress. He was not. Instantly, the office closed. Instantly, all the sorters stopped work. They we're not standing for this. Not even people who were suspicious, maybe, are not entirely comfortable with what was being alleged. Except, but we're not having this. We're not having a manager coming along and saying you're sacked on the spot. Sort of, and us not doing anything about it. So they walked out on the Shankill Road. Within a couple of hours, the Falls Road sorting office was out as well, in solidarity. Now, the first little thing I glossed note or a footnote I put on that little story is there you have something, sort of which is unusual, or on the face of it is unusual, sort of which contradicts the way we normally think of society in Northern Ireland, and even the way we think about ourselves sometimes. There you had the classical cliche Falls and the Shankill coming out together, not because anybody had told them to. It happened spontaneously Workers in the Shankill said, we're not allowing our member, but things like that. And workers in the Falls saying, well, we're not going to allow the Shankill workers to have to fight this one on their own. So when it went further than that, it was an unofficial strike, but an unusual unofficial strike is that it had, or it seemed to me to have, the goodwill of almost every trade union official in Belfast, even though, as always, trade union officialdom was very nervous about stepping into something which was unofficial. But there was my personal experience of this was when I was phoned and asked to come up and speak sort of at a rally in support of the workers. Right, yeah, I will. The rally took the form of a meeting in the city centre in Belfast in Unity Houses. They're the T&G building, the Unite building. I just showed you how old I am, the T&G building. Anyway, and then there was a march, and the march was spontaneous as well. I didn't think it was going on a march when I got there, and we marched up the Shankill Road, through the barrier, the peace wall at Lanark Way, and down the Falls Road. Now, Lanark Way, people might remember, in fact, you will remember, is the place sort of that was leading the news every night for about 3 weeks, just some months ago, when there was rioting, sort of at the peace line, at the peace line, or a peace barrier, whatever you would call it, at Lanark Way. Now, what happened on that occasion, when we reached the top of the Falls Road, is that and walking up the Shankill Road, I mean, there'd be a number of people would recognize who I am, sort of, and twice as we walked up the Shankill Road, and because I was a speaker up from Derry all that way, I was in the front row of this march with a number of other people. Twice as we walked up a Shankill Road, people came from the pavement out to the march. Once just outside the Shankill Women's Centre, a little group of women came on onto the road. Another occasion, there were 2 men came onto the road, and they all wanted to say the same thing. They won't say, "You're very welcome on the Shankill Road, Mr. McCann." I remember the Mr. Yeah, because I'm not usually called Mr. McCann. "You're very welcome on the Shankill Road, Mr. McCann." And the guy said the same thing. Now ask yourself, in what other context would I sort of be able to walk up the Shankill Road and be recognised, and people to make a point of walking sort of across the road to say, "You're very welcome on the Shankill Road"? It contradicts almost everything that we've come to think of as they associate with the Shankill Road. So, and I mean, and on a Friday night, I tell you, sort of at closing time, I'm not about to walk up the Shankill Road again. Mind you, a whole lot of other roads I wouldn't walk up either. But it's just on that occasion, why was that the reaction? It's actually because this was working class activity. That's what it was. That's what united people, or made them sort of feel sort of a common cause with me on that occasion, is that I was there doing something sort of along with workers on the Shankill Road. And we reached Lanark Way. The barrier was open so as we could pass through. So we had a meeting at Lanark Way, and a rally, sort of just where the peace line is there. The Falls on one side and the Shankill on the other. And we stood in the middle. It wasn't a massive crowd, but certainly there's a couple of hundred sort of from the Falls Road came up, and a couple of hundred from the Shankill. So we had about 500 people. And they stood in the middle. And 5 or 6 of us spoke to them. And it was very popular. People sort of cheered and all this. Again, think about it. Doesn't that contradict everything we know, I think we know, about Lanark Way and about the 2 communities, so to speak, who live on either side of a Lanark Way? Now, there's a germ of wisdom, political wisdom in that, and working class political wisdom, which seems to me should be absolutely central to everything we do and every time we talk about sectarianism and how horrible it is and how we're going to get rid of it. There it is. There it is. It's staring us in the face. That's how you contradict sectarianism. That's how you get people. Here's can people not come together and forget their differences? Well, I'm not sure that anybody forgot their differences, but something more important was immediately before them on that occasion. And you can see that over and over and over again. And if I've got a couple of examples, I imagine, sort of, in fact, I would have no doubt that there's other sort of a trade unionists all over the north and in Belfast have this same understanding. I don't know how long ago, 10, 12 years ago, I remember there was a couple of big rallies organised by the ICTU in defence of the health service, which is under severe attack from the Tories, sort of, and all sorts of fronts. And I remember speaking outside Belfast City Hall. I was on the Northern Executive of the ICTU today. I remember standing up on the platform outside the City Hall and looking out at this crowd in Donegal Place and from the mouth of Royal Avenue and so on. The press the next day said 25,000 people, and that's probably about right. It's a huge crowd by trade union standards in Northern Ireland. And a very, very simple thought struck me as I went forward to speak. And so when I looked at all these people, it's an obvious thing to say. Here we had all these people in the city centre in Belfast. They're all united. They're all cheering together and shouting together, and you couldn't tell which was a Catholic or a Protestant. Partly, of course, because we're all white and European, so it's easy enough to mix this up. And again, I would say to you, in what other circumstances would that happen? What other organisation would call a demonstration that would draw so many people for so many different sides? We had church workers and shipyard workers, sort of education workers, health workers, all together without any distinction. You see, I put it that if I don't know who the people were, and who's Catholics and who's Protestant, neither did they, neither did anybody in the crowd, because it didn't matter. The community that you came from, in those circumstances at that time, it didn't matter. This thing, sort of a religious division, sectarian division, which all the world looks at Northern Ireland and they think that that's what Northern Ireland is about, that there's no other dimension to our existence here, but fighting one another between our two communities. There you have it. I don't have to argue that it's possible to overcome sectarianism or to bring people together. You know, when liberals talk in Northern Ireland, we've got to bring people together, and what they mean is let's all be very soft and sweet, sort of, and people will come and unthreatening and so on. No recorded case in our history, no recorded case of large numbers of people coming together because somebody urged them. The moral persuasion has not worked. I mean, if we could end sectarianism through moral persuasion, it would never get off the ground in the first place. But over and over again, sort of, we can see that. And we can see it right at the beginning in Northern Ireland of the state. The state set up, for sectarian reasons, to give one community the whip hand over the other community. If you ask anybody, sort of say, even a history professor from Dublin, say, you ask them, what was the big significant thing which happened in this country in January 1919, just at the time, when people were mobilizing on both sides, as we say, sort of entering a decade of centenaries, the 100th anniversary of the foundation, all that. You ask anybody to explain that. You say, what was happening? What were the significant incidents? They'll almost certainly mention Solo Head Bug. Solo Head Bug's a village sort of in County Tipperary, which saw the first action of the Irish War of Independence, when a couple of IRA people, Dan Breen, Sean Tracy, and somebody else's name I forget, shot two policemen. That was the start of the Irish War of Independence. It wasn't people sitting, running forward to armies in formation. As to happen. So that was very important. You trace our history back, was a very, very important moment, no doubt about it. But if you had been around at the time and asked in January 1919, and you'd ask yourself, what's the most important thing going on this island at the moment? I'll tell you what it was. It was martial law in Belfast. The whole of Belfast had been placed under martial law. Why? Because of what in effect was a general strike. The engineering workers, sort of mainly Protestant, and general workers in large industries came out. The whole trade union movement came out. This was part of the great wave of militancy which followed the First World War. Same wave of militancy that gave rise sort of to near uprisings in South Wales among the miners and so on, in Glasgow and the shipyards, of course, and so on. Anytime you're arguing with people from across the water or somebody say, you're from Northern Ireland, you're not really trade union minded. Belfast held out longer than Red Clydeside in the struggles after World War I against wage cuts and for security of a job and the rest of it. That's what was happening mainly. We lose that. Why do we not see that? Because they're somehow not blinded to, but as life goes on, the day-to-day life of politics and organisation in Northern Ireland seems to have nothing to do sort of with working class unity and working class action like that. We're only mindful of that when it happens. When it happens. The one thing, the way sort of workers remember trade union history is by action in the trade union press. People want to come together. Working class people do not want to be divided. That's a myth. We always say the working class is divided because people are divided generally, or they can't overcome history and so on. They do. So history tells us sort of internationally, and I think with particular sharpness in Ireland, is that when people shrug off old hatreds that divide them. It's always on the basis of struggle. It's always on the basis of struggle. I mean, this is, look, in the last few years, I think the politically probably the most exciting thing, the most significant thing that's taken place in Ireland, North and South, is the rise of the women's movement. And I mean, it'd be patronizing maybe for me to go, Ross, oh gosh, that was inspiring. And that, I've been on the road for a long time, sort of involved in socialist politics. Many marches and down through the years. The most hopeful, the most lively and meaningful political action I've ever been involved in was the strike for a woman's right to choose, not the strike, a campaign for a woman's right to choose in Ireland, North and South. I can remember in Carndona. Now, Carndona is a village in Donegal. You don't get many revolutionary sparks flying out of, actually you do when I think about it, Carndona. Carndona is a very interesting place. I talk about the International Textile Workers Union, which got millions of members, particularly in Southern Asia. You know, sort of the general secretary of that for many, many years, for about 30 years, was a man from Carndona. And here's an interesting thing. I spoke in Carndona the week after he died, and I discovered that nobody in the audience knew who he was. That's our fault. That's the trade union movement's fault. He said, but it's everywhere. There's little sparks everywhere. You can do it. But I can remember in Carndona, I was out canvassing with kind of the local campaign for a woman's right to choose, and seeing well, I'm going to a little estate, you know, maybe 20 houses or something like that off the road. And I sort of realized as people went in, I was the only man there. I also was twice the age of anybody else present as this young woman. And I mean, if you are my age and getting a bit tired with things and so on, there's nothing like a fillip like that. You see, and young women had no bother on them at all. They charged up, you know, they rump up the houses and knock on the door and begin talking to people and so on. I still be nervous doing that if I go out canvassing. I'm always a bit shy of knocking and imposing myself on other people. These people didn't. They were the most militant, organized, sort of high energy, high spirited group of people I've ever campaigned with. Why were they there? They were all, did they all suddenly become militants? Did they all suddenly decide that they were going to go out and campaign? Not at all. Not at all. They came together, one drawing a strength from the other, and in so doing, should give an example to the entire trade union movement and the entire sort of the mass of working class people. And seems to, I'll finish this. I ramble on too. I'm always doing that. You get if you want to do history, I mentioned 1919. Also, 1907, when there was marches in Belfast, Catholic and Protestant. 1932. It was called the Poor Law riots. The Poor Law was a sort of primitive form of social security, and when it was cut, there were people came out. There's terrific. If you want to read something that'll do your heart good, you come from this horrible wee part of the world. If you want something that'll do your heart good, read, and it's easily available. So James Kelly, writing in the Irish Independent, his description of what was going on in the streets in 1932, when he describes people exchange. The police said, the cops said that. They complained that they couldn't keep control of things here because there was an exchange of rioters between the Falls and the Shankill in order to confuse the situation. Now, isn't that just brilliant? They not only were marching up the one and down the other as they did in the postal sorter strike that I was referring to earlier, they were rioting together. Now, I'm not asking people to run out and start rioting immediately, although of course if some people want to do that, there's nothing that I personally could do to stop them. You know, but on this occasion in 1932, they were coming from both sides to take on the cops. Now, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that what people, I mean, what people believe today, there's a hundred people who are supposed to be primitive and old-fashioned, you know, well, what's that, 90 years ago? You know, not at all. They're 100 miles ahead of where politicians are today, those people. They're back in 1932. And that happened because of the nature of the action, because it was working class action. And when you gather together in those numbers, you know, Marx talked about, you know, sloughing off the muck of ages, racism and sectarianism and sexism and so forth. And the way you slough off the muck of ages is being in action together with your arms linked together. That's what does it. It's not gunfire has never united anybody. You know, voting has never united anybody. But the sound of marching feet has got no sectarian connotation. It doesn't speak Catholic. It doesn't speak Protestant. It speaks working class when people march together. And that can be a heady experience. The campaign in itself It's not primarily a question of what your slogans were, what your analysis was, how good your argument was, sort of in standing in a hall or just with friends and so on. It's the nature of the action of coming together, people coming together. All good trade unionism, in fact, and all good revolutionary ideas have to do with do-it-yourself. DIY, do it yourself. And if you do it yourself with workers from another community or another, you overcome it. This is the answer to sectarianism. There is none other. Now, I'm not saying, just you could caricature that and say we must have, working class uprising or we'll have sectarianism. But I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that I mentioned a couple of history tells us that there are no occasions when people come together to fight together for a better life for all. There are no occasions when that happens other than in the course of organized, militant, working class action. And that, at their best, is what trade unions are about. That's what they're designed to do. And in that way, to fight for trade union rights, to make it easier sort of for workers to actually take action. The fight to do that is part of the fight against sectarianism. It isn't that there's two separate things. The trade union struggle, and then there's a political struggle, as many people, and many of them are decent people, sort of want to be doing the best that they can, but they can't see, they don't see, because all the pressures in our society are sort of against seeing these as the same thing, that the fight against sectarianism and the fight for trade union rights and trade union militancy are one and the same thing. You not win one without winning the other. All these people who talk about, well, they mean well, I suppose, or most of them, that when church persons come together, and hold little ceremonies and they preach and we all got to come together, blah, 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 and all that. It doesn't actually bring together. What brings people together and changes them? When people are there in those numbers, in big numbers, all together, organized together, and understanding that you won't win if I don't win. So, and that's a really heady thing to happen to people as individuals. That can change minds. The minds of masses of people in a way that normal, so to speak, propaganda never can. So people start to ask, well, is there any solution at all to that Northern Ireland business? We ask it ourselves sometimes. Dear God, is there any solution to it at all? The solution's right before us. Militant, organised, working class action is the solution to sectarianism in the North, and only through trade union organisation can that be achieved. I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Eamonn. Apologies, folks, for some pathetic individuals interrupting Eamonn in our meeting there, but they've been pushed out thanks to our technical side from Paul. But thanks very much, Eamonn. Thanks for that. Our next speaker, Susan Parler. She's the president of NEU in the North. So, Susan, thanks for joining us, and over yourself.
Well, thanks, Gerry, for putting me right after Eamonn McCann there, because it's a very hard act to follow. But I'll do my best. So, basically, I want to say thanks for inviting me here tonight. And I really do believe that there's never been a better time to put forward the bill to strengthen the trade union movement, because I do believe that at the moment it's at an all-time low. And basically, the history, I suppose, of in the UK and the Northern Ireland, we have, as you've pointed out in your bill, basically the most restrictive trade union laws in all of Europe. In fact, it would be fair to say that the trade union laws here are even more restrictive now than they were in the 19th century and in the early 20th century. And basically, to that effect, we can say that basically the history of trade union legislation and the trade union law has been kind of like one step forward and maybe 2 or 3 steps backward. And I'm just going to I'm not going to give you a history lesson, but I did look across the water to just kind of look back in history to see the way it has gone, because we're now, and then look at the 2016 Trade Union Act, because usually what we've adopted across the water, which started across the water, was delivered here, in the 1990s. So basically, it's a series of wins and losing. And basically, we started the 19th century. It was all good. We had a Combination Act, which brought together the combining of men and women to increase their wages. That was great news, a win. But this was repealed in 1895. Not so good. In 1802 and 1833, we had these Factory Acts, which were really good in restricting the age and working hours of children. And the 10-Hour Act did exactly what it said on the tin. You know, it delivered a 10-hour working day for factory workers. If you flip forward 100 years, we had a bit of a win with the 1906 Trade Disputes Act, but followed by a lot of losses again. Flip forward again to the 1960s, and we had the Contract of Employment Act, and we had some wins. The 1970s delivered some wins. We had the Health and Safety Act, we had the Equalities Act, we had 1975 then, a bit of a loss again. We had restrictions on picketing and on secondary action. In 1980s, we had a win with the Sex Discrimination Act coming in. But in 1986, we had the introduction of the Public Order Act, which made it a criminal act with relation to picketing. Following Thatcher, then we had, you know, the 1890 and 90s, we had the Employment Acts. And what these served to do was to further erode the power of our trade unions, you know, where we had to have pre-strike ballots, postal ballots, and really importantly, it outlawed, you know, which is really important for the kind of trade union movement, as Eamonn has kind of, you know, very, you know, articulately put, was the solidarity that it created, you know, that, and by outlawing secondary actions, it isolated, you know, workers who were engaged in kind of industrial disputes, you know, and what we need is cohesion. So it also granted the right of, in the 1990s, the right of employers to seek injunctions where they believed, you know, there was a legal loophole existed for them to do so. So I suppose if we go forward to, I suppose, what we have here, well, across the water at the moment, we've got the 2016 Trade Union Act, and that really has scared me because that act has eroded the power of unions like no other act has before. And while this came into being in March 2017, and while here in Northern Ireland the Assembly did not adopt it at the time, I don't think that, you know, we're out of the woods yet. And I think that looking at the current political landscape in Stormont, that, you know, someone somewhere along the line in the not too distant future will suggest, hey, why don't we bring this on board? You know, it's working in England, you know, and I think that the trade union bill, the freedom bill that you've put forward, is a real good stepping stone to push back against this. And this is exactly what we need at the moment. And I know that we're talking to very knowledgeable trade unionists here, many of whom know way more than I do. But I think it might be worth reminding people here what the restrictions are with this, you know, what restrictions came into being with the Trade Union Act 2016. And what it has effectively done, it has really tied the hands of trade unions, and it has made them really nervous about taking any form of industrial action, particularly strike action, you know, and to defend kind of their members' terms and conditions of service, and you know, the bread and butter of what trade unions do. Basically, the main points, the main takeaways from this is that basically there are higher thresholds for success, and industrial act are needed. We need, in England, they need a 50% turnout requirement in on industrial ballots for the results to be deemed legally valid. Now, that's a frightening statistic, really, because, you know, we were lucky at this point that we don't even have that. And even trying to get people at the stage to ballot, because we're taking indicative ballots ourselves, teachers' unions, is very difficult. So on top of that, when this 50% turnover requirement is achieved, there has to be within that a 40% support fraction, or else you can't go anywhere with your acts and trade unions count. The notice, which is in the Trade Union Freedom Bill as well, you want it reduced to 2 days. That's excellent, because what they have done in the 2016 Trade Union Act is they have doubled it from 7 to 14 days, except in cases where the employer agrees to stick to 1 week's notice. And we all know that this will never happen. What employer is going to say, yeah, that's fine with me? It's just not going to happen. So what this does over there in England is that basically provides additional time for the employer. It gives them kind of some time to prepare, to resist the strike or to plan a media campaign against it. So that therefore, I suppose, potentially protecting itself against the disruptive nature of the action and reducing again the leverage which unions have, you know, at any negotiating table, you know. And what we want to be doing at this particular point is strengthening our hand. So other restrictions include the expiry of mandate for industrial action, which means that the vote in support of industrial action will become invalid after 6 months if no action has been taken. And what's the impact then? Well, the impact then is going to be in terms of union resources, in terms of finances, because it's going to lead to messier disputes. It's basically going to mean that employers will be able to kind of string unions along until the expiry date of their ballot, preventing them from reaching a point in the negotiations for a strike action. And they may never reach a solution. Other legislation pertaining to this is the requirement for union supervision of picketing. So what unions now need to do is they need to elect an official supervisor for their pickets. They need to give the police their name, their contact details, and the location of the picket. And they must be easily identifiable through wearing an armband, and they must carry a letter of authorization from the union to be sure, basically, that they have permission to be the official at that picket line. In terms of the ballot paper, which you have addressed as well, Gerry, is basically the information that is needed over there. Extra information must be included in the ballot papers. For example, trade unions need to provide additional details of what workers are voting for on the ballot. At the moment, some unions give workers the choice between strike action, action short of strike action, and no action. Now they have to provide more detail on that. So that's just kind of a flavour of what our comrades across the water are now up against in terms of defending our workers and when industrial action needs to be taken. And we don't want this to come over here. We don't want it over there, but we certainly don't want it here. And in fact, what the Trade Union Freedom Bill makes clear is that we're not happy with the current trade union legislation as it stands. And we're not, because it in itself is really, really restrictive. I know at the moment, because all the teachers unions are looking at this derisory pay deal, and it's just the mechanics of even getting into kind of a ballot stage is restrictive. So I fully support you on what you're doing, and thank you for putting it forward. So we're not happy with the current trade union laws under the Trade Union Labour Relations Northern Ireland Order of 1995, and we consider them restrictive. And the Trade Union Freedom Bill rightly calls for changes to this. Now, when we look at the kind of particular workplace environment and the climate that we have at the moment, we can see that workers' vulnerability in the workplace is at an all-time high, and the job security is at an all-time low. Workers find themselves in a very precarious position, and where they need more than ever before to be protected by trade union legislation, have their trade unions be able to act on their behalf, because we're living in the climate of the gig economy, where working practices have become more adversarial than ever before. And we have basically employment instability, where 0 hours contracts are on the rise, and the practices such as fire and rehire are becoming more and more commonplace. We're hearing about it every day, in the media, and we're seeing how kind of employers are trying to kind of get around this legislation, and unions are fighting back. We have workers, employers, and self-employed. So even the status of workers renders them vulnerable, because not all employees have the same statutory rights at work. and what comes along with that is the kind of raft of, you know, the working world has become really complicated and complex in terms of the range of contracts, you know, that are now out there. 0 hours, you've got part-time workers, you've got fixed-term workers, you've got permanent workers, home workers, you've got children, temporary employees, agency workers. I mean, I could go on. The list is endless, and none of these are in situations which are particularly kind of stable. So what I'm saying is basically the world of work is really stacked against the workers, and it is heavily, you know, weighted in favor of the employee, of not the employee, the employer. And we need stronger, more robust trade union legislation, you know, to address this current working place climate, and it needs to serve the worker and not the capitalist, not the employer. As a trade unionist, I personally believe, I'm not speaking for my trade union on this, that there should be no limits on the freedoms of workers to take immediate strike action. No notice should be necessary. For instance, if management victimized or sacked a rep, workers, I believe, should be able to walk out on strike with immediate effect. Basically, you know, I suppose unions themselves, on a broader point and looking at the bigger picture, I think that we need to kind of accept that at the current time, we've got less than 25% of workers on the island of Ireland are trade union members. So alongside the weakening legislation, which we're trying to rectify, thankfully, union relevance to workers has waned. It is 23.5% of workers across the water in England are members of a trade union, or I think it might be all of the UK. So this needs to be addressed and tackled head on, I think, by trade unions themselves. You know, maybe that's for another forum, but I think we do need to self-reflect to the degree that unions need to reflect to the degree to which they are committed to fighting for genuine workers' democratic control of the unions, where workers have the right to be consulted on all key issues and the right to have their decisions implemented. Now, the proposed legislation is a wonderful stepping stone to, you know, in the right direction, and I really welcome it. I believe that capitalist governments and political parties should have no right to regulate the workers' movement. Their parliament should have no right to pass laws that restrict trade union freedom. I think that the members of the trade union movement should regulate the activity of their organisations, and they should have the democratic control of all structures and negotiating bodies, and they should ensure that unions have a fighting leadership. So democracy and fighting leadership, I don't believe, can be delivered by Parliament, and it can only be delivered by workers' struggle to transform unions, and we need to get more union members to do that. So that's I think they're all interrelated. So basically we can't take a like-minded approach to trade unions breaking the law. The implications for trade union movement are significant, but we should always be prepared to break the law when necessary. For example, during the COVID crisis, the trade union movement should have clearly stated their willingness to call emergency strike action to protect the lives of members. And I think that such action would have been most effective on the basis of a workplace ballot and an immediate walkout. We're not doing that because trade union legislation, again, we're bound to it. So I think basically such an approach is necessary. The legislation definitely needs to change. In terms of the bill, I welcome its contents. The 2 days notice, absolutely. Basically, the solidarity, I think, is essential, bringing back secondary action, you know, because it does bind us all together as workers. It creates cohesion and it gives confidence, you know, to the workers themselves you know, that they can actually take back and retrieve control, you know, because we are many, they are few, and that is the truth. You know, we need to kind of engender that confidence. I think basically, you know, it is basically, I hope that it does go through. I'm not sure that it will at Stormont level, but you know, we need to retrieve power and fight back in order to deliver for workers. And thank you for putting it forward. People for Profit and MLA. Gerry, that's me.
Thanks very much, Susan. Thanks for your comprehensive run through the bill and kind of the laws across the water that are even worse than what we have. But thank you very much, Susan, and for joining us this evening. Folks, our second last speaker, Dave Gibney. Thanks for joining us this evening. Dave is a trade unionist in his own right, but he also hosts or runs, whatever is the correct word, the Work podcast, which is a really, really good podcast running through politics from a left-wing angle, and check that out if you haven't already. So Dave, thanks for joining us, and over to yourself.
Thanks, Gerry. Just my background, I suppose, host of the Week at Work and activist with Left Bloc, but I'm a Unite member, and I work for a Mandate Trade Union. That's my day job as communications officer. Look, I commend the bill, commend Gerry and People Before Profit for putting this forward, and sometimes I wonder, do people, I know I'm not necessarily talking to the people on this group, but I generally don't think people understand the importance of this issue, trade union rights, because it leads directly into all of the other social conditions and that we face. A long few years ago, about 12 years ago, I did a bit of work for the Institute of Public Health in Ireland. And for people who don't know who they are, they're an all-island body who collate data on social implications from policies. And one of the key things that always struck with me from my period of time working with them was the figure of across the island of Ireland that there are 5,400 premature deaths as a result of economic inequality. Now, to put that in context, that's more deaths than we saw in the entire period of the Troubles that take place every single year from economic inequality. Another stark piece of data on an all-island basis, obviously I'm coming from the Republic of Ireland's perspective on this, but on an all-island basis is the excess winter mortality rates that we have on this island are far higher than anywhere else in the EU, including much colder countries. And people will probably have come across the excess deaths as a result of the COVID crisis. It's the first time I've really seen people talking about how many extra deaths we're having per year. But what it means is in the winter months on this island, more people die, 2,900 more people die as a result of not being able to heat their home effectively, not having a proper insulation in their homes. And that all, whether you're counting on them or those statistics, housing, healthcare, education, all of the other bits and pieces, it's all related to trade unionism and to work, because people's incomes aren't sufficient. People's retirement incomes aren't sufficient. If you want to go directly into the work stuff, we have the second highest prevalence in the Republic of Ireland, second highest prevalence of low pay in the entire EU. And that means, well, the figure is 23% of all jobs in the South are officially low paid. We have the second highest prevalence of underemployment, meaning that people are so low paid that they want more hours at work, but they can't actually achieve those extra hours at work, pushing them again into the poverty and deprivation trap. All of this stuff stands in stark contrast to some of the stuff that was said earlier, but also in relation to a company we deal with, Tesco Ireland, but they don't release their figures in the South, but Tesco in the UK and Ireland have multiplied their profits by 400% in the last 5 years. Now, imagine if a group of workers were able to win a 400% pay increase. Can you imagine the reaction from the media to that sort of successful win by a trade union? We saw a number of years ago in the Lewis dispute in the South, and we see it regularly whenever workers put out demands for 10 or 20% pay increases. There's outrage that these people think that they're worth that, but there's nothing when it comes to the profits and the dividends for the shareholders. There are many solutions to the problems we have, the crises that we're facing north and south, including renationalisation, remunicipalisation, public ownership, universal basic services when it comes to healthcare, housing. There's a whole range of that, but none of that can happen, in my opinion, without organised labour. And we really, really need to get our finger on what organised labour is in this country. What what you've put forward, Gerry, and people before profit in the Trade Union Freedom Bill is a huge stepping stone in the right direction. I had listed all of the different bits, and we discussed it on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about some of the important points around it, so people can go back and have a listen to it, because we had a lot longer for that conversation. But in terms of the solidarity action, I just wanted to tell a story about a strike that our union, predecessor union, that took place in 1969. I think we really need to get back to this sort of thing. But in Tipperary, in a town in Tipperary, a group of workers went on strike against a company that wasn't their employer, because they were hiring workers in who were undermining their terms and conditions of employment, driving their wages and terms and conditions down. So every Saturday, these trade unionized employees would walk across the road when they finished their shift and picket outside of an employer who was hiring people on lower terms and conditions of employment. And they were using the 1906 Act that was referred to earlier on. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that they were perfectly entitled to do so, because there were workers across the road who were trying to undermine their terms and conditions and their living standards. We really need to get back to that as well, not just solidarity picketing, but go beyond it and say, if another group of workers are undermining your terms and conditions, we go over, we picket, and we try to recruit them to our crusade for better terms and conditions of employment. I'm not going to go through all of the list of it all, but one of the other things that was just mentioned by the last speaker there about the shorter notice periods, I don't know if people remember in 2018 when there was the big Ryanair strike all across Europe. The Irish pilots and the UK pilots all had to give 7 days notice. The German pilots issued a nice little press release that said, we're in the interest of not upsetting the public, we're going to have to give 24 hours notice. They have no legal restrictions around how much notice they need to give to go on strike. And I thought it was a great statement to say, we're doing this in the public interest, but we could have dropped our tools yesterday, but we'll hang on just so we don't upset too many people. We need to get back to that as well, because we saw in a number of different disputes that we've had over the last 10 years, where workers, particularly low-paid workers in the retail trade, who's what Mandate Trade Union represents, as soon as they issued ballots or strike notice to the company went on a retribution campaign, went around threatening them. They'd have their family income supplements removed because the company could reduce their hours from 25 or 30 hours per week down to 18, and you need a minimum of 19 hours per week in order to get the supplementary social welfare system. So giving companies time and to prepare themselves and to lodge all these arguments and to intimidate workers into not going on strike is a huge problem that we face across the world on this stuff. What I've been arguing for over the last couple of years in the South is a Fair Work Act, which would encapsulate a whole range of things, but you could break it down into what you sort of synopsized earlier on, Gerry, and it's 1, make it easier for people to join trade unions; 2, make it easier for those workers to collectively bargain; and 3, make it easier for those workers to withdraw their labor, to take industrial action when they need to. That might come about in terms of a wide act, a Fair Work Act, or it might come about through chipping away at the system, little acts here and there. One particular act that I've been pushing for a long time, since 2013, was when I was a trade union organizer over in Australia. We had what was called right of entry, and what we've been calling here is right of access. And what that meant was, in the morning, I could go in and fax any company anywhere in the state that I was operating in, which was Victoria. And the next day, within those 24 hours notice, I could go in. A company must give me a room to have trade union discussions for 3 reasons. 1, to do inspections on workplace rights compliance; 2, inspections on health and safety compliance; and 3, for collective bargaining purposes. And there's nothing the company can do to prevent me from having that room. That is the single most important piece of legislation we could bring in across this island, because if we can get access to workers and talk to them, then we can convince them to join the trade union movement and to potentially take industrial action in the future. Another one is deductions at source, where we have companies who refuse to deduct money and pass it on to the trade union. That's a big issue for us in a lot of major employers. They only sound like little things, but these are the things that make it really easy for people to join trade unions. I had a couple more, but I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to move on towards wrapping this up. But in terms of the stuff that we've all been talking about here, and I just want to point people to the document that Unite, the union, did last year on inequality. I'm sure it's up on their website. Economic inequality is one of the biggest challenges we face at this moment in time, and the best way to chase it down and to defeat it is through the trade union movement. The data that I've been looking at for many years now within the trade union movement, there's 3 key components that I think are completely linked. One is wages as a proportion of the economy. And since the 50s and 60s, that's been in steady decline in the south anyway, and I'm sure it's the same in the north. But it's if you did a chart, and I have the charts, I just did do a PowerPoint today, apologies, but I'll put them up at some stage. But if you watch the trend for wages as a proportion of the economy, or wages as a proportion of GDP, Ireland has the second highest decline in wages as a proportion of the economy in the developed world out of all OECD countries. Second highest decline, right? And during that period of time, you can correlate that with days lost to industrial action. And then in terms of correlating that, you can correlate that with the trade union density levels, which in the year that I was born, the trade union density levels were 54% in the Republic of Ireland. They're down now at probably about 22 or 23%, less than half. In terms of industrial days lost to industrial disputes or lost to strike, the year I was born, it was 1.4 million days were lost to industrial strikes. Last year, it was 21,000. And that's actually quite a good increase from 2018 when it was 4,000 days lost to industrial action. So from 1.4 million to 4,000. And the reason I raise that, and I'm constantly raising that, is because when workers struggle, when they go on strike, that's when we get a new breed, a new generation of trade union activists. And the less struggles that we have, the less activists we're going to have for the future. And we are still suffering from the period of social partnership in the South, and social dialogue, as they're rebranding it now, is going to be disastrous for us if we still, kowtow to what the government is looking for. So I just wanted to finish up by pointing out that legislation is a tool in this struggle. I know people have spoken a little bit about this, but in the struggle that we're talking about, whether it's inequality or housing or healthcare, education, these tools should be there, as your piece of legislation is, in order to help us to organize the workers themselves. They're not the solution. Bringing in universal rights for all workers is not going to solve our problems, because they can be stripped away just as quickly. The most important thing, and that's why I focused on access and entry, right to entry. The most important thing is that we're able to get workers organized so that they can fight back at any level, at any point, whenever they feel like it. So, look, I just want to say best of luck to yourself, Gerry, to People Before Profit, and to everybody that's fought for this bill to come in. We'll do a little bit more coverage on the Week at Work about it when it's a success, and then we'll have to have a discussion about how we can extend those rights to the South, because we are already a laggard. We're both laggards when it comes to this stuff across the developed world, but you will be shooting ahead of us if you're successful. So I wish all the best, and let's compete upwards, comrades. Oh, by the way, on the right to entry and right to access stuff, I see my comrade Joe Carolan is on the call here from New Zealand. He's able to use that piece of legislation in New Zealand every single day. So this isn't just an Australian thing. This is across a lot of other countries that it's taken for granted in those countries, but we need to learn from what they're doing right. So solidarity, Joe.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for joining us, and really appreciate the kind words and solidarity. Hopefully it does re-kickstart a conversation in the South, as you said. Folks, our final speaker, Laura Graham from the Bakers Union. Laura, alongside Unite as well, were involved in a really incredible campaign last summer, the HOVA strike, to illustrate how workers can fight back and get above inflation pay offers. So, Laura, thanks for joining us this evening, and over to yourself for comments.
Hi Gerry, how are you? Listen, it's a pleasure to be on, and I will be very brief because I didn't actually know I was going to be expected to speak tonight, so I actually haven't prepared anything. But I suppose you don't really have to prepare anything whenever you're talking about something so important as trying to change the laws and aid to support the workers of the country. And it's no surprise when you opened up, Gerry, by telling us that there's been little to no effort on behalf of the people we have in the Hill at the minute to support the workers. The very workers that everybody through the pandemic was out applauding. They were heroes, they were NHS heroes, food heroes if it was our industry, but those are the people who are long forgotten now, and having to go back to the extremes of going to strike to get a fair pay rise. And it's ridiculous as well that that we have to sit and talk about trying to change these laws where we have devolved employment law here in Northern Ireland. And let's face it, you know, Labour done nothing for all the years they were in power either. So it's only going to be achieved if we all come together in solidarity. And that's one of the points I wanted to pick out of, you know, all the points that you have brought up there in the bill is the solidarity action. You know, you mentioned there the Hovis strike. Solidarity was what brought a lot of our members through. Solidarity from the workers and the members of NIPSA, standing shoulder to shoulder with our comrades in Unite in joint action. Eamonn touched on, you know, like the divisions in religion. You don't see division in religion when you're standing on a picket line. That is solidarity action at its finest. So, you know, and that for me would be a very significant change, you know, if we can get this here through. What we've done in our union, in the Bakers Union, is we've encouraged every member, every branch, to letter their MLAs, to ask them what they're doing to support the bill. You know, like, just to remain quiet on it's not enough. We all need to be pulling together and highlighting, you know, the issue of it, because, you know, it's the workers, you know, you've got the sound bites of the backbone of the country, but they really, really are. You know, we had a guy on there talking about the decline in trade union membership, and it's not surprising that that came about with the introduction of the anti-trade union legislation in the 80s and the 90s. It's designed to strip the power from the people who can come together the most and use it, and that's the workers. You know, like, shortening the time that you'd have to give the notice to your employer, that's another crucial one. You know, it does give the employer time to plan and prepare and to discourage employees or members from taking any action at all. I think, you know, changing that to 2 days is very, very significant, in that it brings a lot of the balance of power back to the workers again. Sorry, I've got company in the background, I do apologise. But that would be significant as well, because, you know, it would mean that an employer is not able to plan and prepare as they can at the minute. And I know for anybody in England, Scotland and Wales, over here would be it's only 7 days notice. You know, you should be grateful. There should be no restrictions, as we already mentioned before. But as I said, I'll be very quick on this. You know, the people that were applauded are the people that are going to have to go out and fight the hardest, because it's their employers that are paying low wages. It's the people in those kind of industries, in the industries that I represent, that are having to claim in-work tax credits, go to food banks because they can't afford to eat, you know, having to make the decision with what's happening in the current climate at the minute, if they can heat their homes or eat. And that shouldn't be happening for the people who kept the country going through a pandemic. But not just that, it shouldn't be happening to any worker that's out working to survive. You live to work, you shouldn't work. Sorry, you work, I'm going to get this wrong. You work to live, you shouldn't live to work. And that's the economy that we've got ourselves into. So as I say, all the points on the bill are fantastic. Those two really stand out to me as being, you know, like the fantastic points where trade unions can come together, and we can, and I think it's important that we do that in the show of solidarity for each other, because it's definitely what I experienced in Hovis has got us through. If we had to do it on our own, I just don't know how strong we would have actually have gotten through it. So as I say, I commend Gerry, Fiona, Matt, everybody that has really put a lot into this here, and hopefully we can get it through.
Thanks very much, Laura, and thanks to you and the Bakers Union and all unions that should have announced at the start for supporting the bill.